I interviewed a whole range of firefighters about the impact of attacks upon them, and also spoke to control staff about the sort of abuse that they put up with in the form of hoax calls, sometimes dirty phone calls, but mostly firefighters about the actual physical attacks. I lived on a station while I was collecting the data, and that allowed me to actually get to grips with the reality of firefighters' lives as they were going about their duties, and to see the way that the attacks are processed once they're reported, talking to the people that collate the stats, talking to the managers that were trying to implement policies to reduce attacks, and also talking to the firefighters about how the attacks have impacted upon them. What emerged from the analysis is that actually you can kind of make a typology or a categorisation of attacks, so that there's a normal attack, which is really it's gangs of youths at a distance throwing stones so they can leg it quickly before people get away from, get after them. That's a very accepted. It's almost taken on as like if you go into certain areas, you expect to have those kinds of attacks. Psychologically, they didn't seem to be damaging. They made people angry, but there was also some sympathy for some of the kids because it was accepted that they were happening in areas of extreme deprivation. And some of the firefighters I spoke to were very sympathetic. These kids don't have great lives, so we understand what's going on. That was the most usual attack, but then there would be also face-to-face violence that was taken as much more personally. The distance attacks were seen as an attack against the role of a firefighter, whereas the personal attacks, the face-to-face ones, were taken as an attack on the individual. And so they were dealt with psychologically. I'm a psychologist, so I'm interested in the psychology. They were dealt with differently because they actually impacted on your identity. They felt it was an attack against you, the individual, not you, the firefighter, not the role. There were also firefighters who spoke about being involved in civil disturbances, and they're probably the only ones that seem to really generate a fear because you weren't facing an individual or even a small gang, but a crowd who were almost out of control of their own humanity. We talk about this in psychology, that a crowd kind of loses sight of the individuals and acts as a crowd. So they were the attacks. Then we also explored abuse, so verbal abuse and spitting, things like that. And again, it kind of separated into categories. So there was abuse that was almost seen as non-abuse, so that if people were going to a call and they were being abused by people who were swearing at them to get them to hurry up to do their job because they were frightened because their house was on fire or their kid was in a car being cut out, and firefighters didn't even see this as abuse. They understood it was panic, it was emotion driven, it was related to the fear of the situation. The abuse of control staff was a little bit different. They get sometimes dirty phone calls, kids playing, making stupid calls, and they're almost seen in the same light as non-abuse. They're just something that's annoying, but you disregard it. It's part of the job. The bit that was almost psychological violence against control staff was really related to hoax calls. That when control staff receive a hoax call, they're very good at actually identifying hoax calls and not sending appliances out. But in the cases where they didn't identify it could cause real psychological distress in terms of anxiety if they haven't heard the address or they can't find the address. So there's a lot of energy put into trying to establish where this non-existent fire is. And then also actually sending the pumps out to a call that turns out to be a hoax generates a lot of guilt in the control staff. They feel they should have spotted it. They should have been better at discerning that it was a hoax, because they've not just wasted the firefighters' time, but obviously if a pump is out, it's not there if there's a genuine emergency. So they were the kind of broad categories that came out of the attacks. The other thing that really came out was that there's a very complicated relationship between attacks and arson, in the sense that firefighters was reporting some attacks which were obviously the fire was being set in order to get firefighters to a certain location that was easy to ambush them. So the primary intention was violence against the firefighter. But in other cases, the fire was the main thing they were interested in, and the attacks were a byproduct of the firefights turning up and putting their fire out. So in that case, you almost get a reversal of who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. To the public, the firefighters are the good guy because they're putting the fire out. But to the youths who've built the fire and created it, the firefighter is actually an invader, and they've destroyed their creation, their fire. So you get a reversal of kind of normal, legitimate actors within that.